never imagined that the invitation to my only son's wedding would end with his fiancée screaming at me to get out of my own house. I can still hear her exact words. "We don't need your opinion, Barbara. You've done enough damage already." Melissa pointed at me with her perfectly manicured index finger, while all the guests at the rehearsal dinner fell silent. The small band I had hired to provide background music stopped abruptly. My son, my Tyler, simply looked down, avoiding any eye contact with me. I stood frozen, unconsciously clutching my purse where I kept the $90,000 check I had just signed that morning to pay the final installment for the venue. The same venue where tomorrow would host a wedding that I had financed down to the last detail. "Aren't you going to say anything, Tyler?" I whispered, my voice breaking with humiliation. My son, the boy I had raised alone for 30 years after his father abandoned us, merely mumbled, "Maybe you should go, Mom. We'll talk tomorrow." I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just the pain of public humiliation, it was the painful realization that my own son had chosen to remain silent while I was treated like an unwelcome stranger at an event I was paying for. With trembling legs, I rose from the table. The guests pretended not to look, suddenly focusing on their glasses or uncomfortable whispers. I walked toward the exit with my head held high, though I was crumbling inside. Once in my car, I let the tears flow freely. 50 years of life had taught me many things, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. My phone began to vibrate in my purse. Messages from some family members and friends. "Are you okay? Why did you leave? You shouldn't make a drama out of this. It's your son's wedding." Not one asked what they had done to me. Not a single person seemed to be on my side. I drove home in silence, with the city lights reflecting in the tears that wouldn't stop falling. But as I drove, something began to change within me. The initial pain was transforming into something more powerful, more defined determination. When I arrived home, I sat at my desk and turned on my computer. I opened the digital folder labeled Tyler and Melissa's wedding and began reviewing each document one by one. Every contract, every deposit, every invoice bore my name. The list was endless. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band, the wedding dress, the bridesmaids' dresses, the custom-designed invitations, the 5-tier custom cake. Everything had come out of my pocket. Even the 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii that I had booked as a surprise. Over $200,000 in total. My early retirement as a financial director of a multinational company had provided me with a privileged financial situation, and I had always thought there was no better way to use that money than ensuring my son's happiness. How wrong I was. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone and searched for Jessica's contact, the wedding planner I had hired 6 months ago. It was late, almost midnight, but I knew she would be awake finalizing details for tomorrow. I took a deep breath and dialed. "Mrs. Collins? Surprised to hear from you at this hour? I was just reviewing the final details for tomorrow," she answered professionally. "Jessica, I'm canceling everything," I said without emotion. There was silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins. I don't think I understood correctly. Did you say cancel?" "Yes, Jessica. I'm canceling the wedding, the venue, the flowers, the catering, everything. I'm withdrawing from the event. But Mrs. Collins, there's less than 12 hours left. The guests, the vendors, there are signed contracts, non-refundable deposits. All contracts are in my name," I interrupted firmly. and all payments have come from my personal accounts. I'm within my legal rights. Mrs. Collins, I understand there might have been a problem, but a decision like this. If I'm not welcome at this wedding, neither is my money. Please contact all vendors first thing in the morning. I'd prefer you inform them before they start preparing. After hanging up, I stared at the phone screen. What I had just done was drastic, impulsive, even. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. If Tyler and Melissa wanted to treat me like an unwanted stranger, they would have to learn that my resources were also dispensable. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony of my apartment. The city slept under a blanket of dim lights, oblivious to the small earthquake I had just triggered. Tomorrow would be a difficult day, full of angry calls and accusations, but I no longer cared. I had endured too much, financed too much, stayed silent too much. No more. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, my phone began to vibrate insistently. Tyler. I rejected the call. 30 seconds later, he called again. I rejected it again. Then the messages started. Mom, what are you doing? The planner just called saying you've canceled everything. Answer the phone, please. This is insane. You can't do this. It's our wedding. The last message made me smile bitterly. Our wedding. As if they had contributed anything beyond demands and whims. I turned off the phone and went to bed, though I knew sleep would be long in coming. What I didn't expect was the furious knocking on my door at 7 in the morning. I got up startled, putting on my robe as the knocking continued. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Mom, open the door. I know you're in there. Tyler's voice sounded desperate. For a moment, I hesitated. A part of me, the mother who for 30 years had put her son's needs above her own, wanted to open the door and comfort him. But another part, the woman who had been publicly humiliated yesterday, stood firm. Mom, you can't do this to us. Guests are already arriving in town. Melissa is devastated. Melissa is devastated. Those words ignited something inside me. What about me? Had anyone worried about how I felt? I approached the door but didn't open it. Go away, Tyler, I said clearly. There's nothing to talk about. It's our wedding, he shouted, knocking harder. You can't cancel it like this. It's not your wedding, I replied calmly. It's my wedding. I organized it, I paid for it, I contracted every service, and now I'm canceling it. You're selfish. You've always been. Melissa was right about you. Those words hurt more than any physical slap. I moved away from the door and returned to my bedroom, ignoring the knocks and shouts that continued for several more minutes. Finally, I heard the sound of his car angrily starting up. When silence returned to the house, I turned on my phone. As expected, it was flooded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, emails, from Tyler, from Melissa, from family, friends, even from some guests who had already noticed something strange was happening. Among all that digital avalanche, one email caught my attention. It was from my bank. A notification of rest transactions on my credit card. I frowned, confused. I didn't remember making any major purchases in the last few days. I opened the email and my heart raced when I saw the charges. Luxury boutique, $18,000 yesterday. Exclusive jewelry, $25,000 yesterday. Additional resort reservation Hawaii, $30,000 yesterday. All these charges had been made during the rehearsal dinner while I was present. While they were humiliating me, someone had been using my credit card. My hand was shaking. when I called the bank to report the fraudulent charges. The representative kindly informed me that the card had been used physically, not online, and that all transactions had been signed. "Can you tell me what name appears on the signatures?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. "One moment, ma'am. Yes, here it is. They're all signed by Melissa Davidson." Melissa, the same woman who had thrown me out of my own party yesterday. The same one now crying over the cancellation of a wedding she hadn't paid for, had been using my card without my consent. And Tyler? Did he know? Was he complicit? Fury invaded me with such intensity that I had to sit down to keep from falling. This was no longer just a matter of respect or boundaries. It was a crime, and both my son and his fiancée were involved. As the bank began the process of disputing the fraudulent charges, my phone rang again. This time it was my sister-in-law, Janet, my late ex-husband's sister. "Barbara, what's going on? Tyler called saying you canceled the wedding over a little argument." "A little argument?" I took a deep breath before responding. "Janet, they threw me out of the rehearsal dinner. They humiliated me in front of all the guests. And I just discovered that Melissa has been using my credit card without my permission for luxury purchases." "Oh," I heard her hesitate. "Tyler didn't mention any of that. He said you were offended by an unimportant comment and were acting vindictively." Of course, that's what he would say. The version of the dramatic and controlling mother was much more convenient than admitting the truth. "Janet, I have the account statements that prove the fraud, and 50 witnesses who saw how they treated me last night. If you want to keep believing Tyler's version, go ahead, but I'm done being the victim in this story." I hung up before she could respond and blocked her number. Then I did the same with all the family members and friends who had called to reproach me for my decision without bothering to ask for my side of the story. The phone kept ringing, but I was no longer listening. Instead, I opened my computer and began reviewing all my account statements from the past few months. What I found left me breathless. Melissa hadn't just used my card yesterday. There was a pattern of suspicious spending that dated back almost a year, when wedding preparations began. Small amounts at first, which gradually increased. Purchases at luxury stores, reservations at expensive restaurants, exclusive spa services, all signed by her. And most painful of all, several charges related to a luxury apartment in downtown, an apartment that supposedly Tyler had rented with his own money to start their new life together. The apartment they had shown me so proudly, explaining how my son had obtained it thanks to his hard work. It was all a lie. Everything had come from my pocket, not just the wedding, but their entire life for the past year. As I processed this betrayal, my doorbell rang. I peeked cautiously and saw Melissa with makeup smeared from tears and dressed in casual clothes, unusual for her. I hesitated but finally decided to confront her. "What do you want, Melissa?" I asked without opening the door completely. "Mrs. Collins." Her voice sounded soft, controlled, very different from yesterday's. "I think we've had a terrible misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding? You threw me out of the dinner, humiliated me in front of everyone, and my son did nothing to defend me. Which part am I supposed to have misinterpreted?" I was nervous, stressed. "You know how these events are." She paused, trying to smile. "Besides, I found this in Tyler's bag." She pulled out a small paper that I immediately recognized. My check for the final payment of the venue. So that's what this was about. She wasn't coming to apologize, but to recover the money. "This is important, Mrs. Collins. The venue, the vendors, we can't lose them now. It's already done, I responded firmly. Everything is canceled, and now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important call to make to my lawyer about certain fraudulent charges on my credit card. Her expression changed instantly. The forced sweetness gave way to a grimace of barely contained rage. You can't prove it, she hissed. Tyler gave me permission to use your card. It's your word against mine. Actually, it's not, I replied calmly. It's my word, plus the security videos from all the stores where you used my card, against yours. Want to bet who will win that case? She visibly paled, but quickly regained her composure. Tyler will never forgive you for this, she said with venom in her voice. You've lost your son forever. It hurt, of course it hurt. But I had cried enough. You can't lose what you never really had, I responded before closing the door. Just a few hours had passed since my confrontation with Melissa when my phone began to vibrate with social media notifications. Upon opening them, I found myself tagged in several of Melissa's posts. In all of them, she appeared crying with artistically smeared makeup, holding her wedding dress as if it were a corpse. Never thought the happiest day of my life would be ruined by jealousy and resentment, read one of the posts. My mother-in-law canceled our wedding on the same day because she can't stand to see her son happy with another woman. The comments didn't take long to arrive, most supporting her and condemning me without knowing the truth. Friends, family, and even strangers joined the virtual lynching. What a toxic woman, typical controlling mother-in-law. Your fiancé should cut all ties with her. My first impulse was to respond, to defend my version. But something stopped me. Lies have short legs, as my grandmother used to say. And this particular lie had too many witnesses and evidence against it to stand for long. Instead of feeding the drama, I called my lawyer, Patricia Hendricks. I had met her years ago during a complicated divorce process, and since then she had become a valuable advisor and friend. I need your help, Patricia, I said after relating the entire situation. You did right to call me, she responded with her characteristic serene tone. First thing we'll do is send a certified letter to Tyler and Melissa demanding the immediate cessation of defamation on social media. Second, we'll initiate legal action for the fraudulent charges. And third, we'll review all accounts and properties you may have jointly with your son. That last part surprised me. Why the joint properties? Because knowing these patterns, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to access any asset they can claim as their own or partially their own. She was right. I remembered that years ago when Tyler started college, I had opened a joint account for his expenses, an account that theoretically had stopped being used when he started working. Was it still active? Patricia, I think I need to check a bank account. 2 hours later, sitting in my bank's office, I confirmed my suspicions. The joint account was not still active, but it showed recent movements, large withdrawals, all made in the last few weeks. Can you see who made these operations? I asked the manager. They were made by Mr. Tyler Collins, he confirmed after reviewing the records. Since it's a joint account, both have the same rights to the funds. My heart sank. One thing was for Melissa to have used my card without permission. Quite another was for my own son to be withdrawing money from our shared accounts, probably anticipating my reaction after canceling the wedding. I want to close this account immediately, I said firmly, and transfer the remaining funds to my personal account. Of course, Mrs. Collins, but I must warn you that, being a joint account, the other holder could contest the operation. I understand the risks. Please proceed. While signing the documents to close the account, my phone vibrated with a message from Patricia. She had donned something else. My name appeared as a guarantor on a recent mortgage loan, a loan that I had never authorized. The luxury apartment, not only had they paid for it with my card, they had forged my signature to get an additional loan. I left the bank feeling physically ill. The betrayal was too deep, too calculated. How long had they been planning this? How far were they willing to go? Back home, I found my apartment door ajar. My heart raced as I entered cautiously, fearing intruders, but what I saw was even worse. Tyler and Melissa rummaging through my personal papers. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper from the shock. Both startled, clearly surprised by my early return. "Mom," Tyler tried to smile as if everything were normal. "We were just looking for the wedding contracts to see if we could salvage anything." Lie. They were looking for financial documents, deeds, anything they could use to continue taking advantage of me. "Get out of my house, now." My voice sounded strangely calm, considering the storm I felt inside. "Mom, don't be like that. We're just trying to fix the mess you've caused." "The mess I've caused?" Incredulity made me raise my voice. "What about the fraud with my card? The withdrawals from the joint account? The mortgage loan with my forged signature?" Melissa paled, but Tyler maintained his defiant expression. "You're my mother. You're supposed to help me, not make a drama out of a few expenses." "A few expenses? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and fraud." "You've always been like this," he shouted, hitting the table with his fist. "Controlling, petty, always throwing in my face everything you've done for me. That's why Dad left you." The blow was as accurate as if he had physically slapped me. For years I had blamed myself for my ex-husband's abandonment, convinced that if I had been more accommodating, more submissive, he wouldn't have sought comfort in other women. But I was no longer that insecure woman. "Your father left because he was a coward unable to assume his responsibilities," I responded firmly. "Just like you. And now get out of my house before I call the police." He took out his phone, defiant. "Go ahead, call. I'll explain how my psychotic mother ruined my wedding and is now threatening me." "Even better," I replied, taking out my own phone. "I'll call my lawyer, who is coincidentally already preparing a fraud complaint against both of you. I'm sure she'd love to add breaking and entering to the list of charges." For the first time, I saw real fear in Tyler's eyes. Melissa, who had remained unusually silent during the exchange, pulled his arm. "Let's go, Tyler. It's not worth it." They left without saying another word, but the look my son gave me before leaving told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't over. I collapsed on the sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. The last 24 hours had been a roller coaster of betrayals, discoveries, and confrontations. But amid all that chaos, one thing had become crystal clear. I needed to protect myself. I called Patricia and related the latest incident. "I'll change the locks today," I decided. "And I want to proceed with all the legal actions you mentioned. This is no longer just about the wedding. We're talking about systematic fraud." "You've made the right decision, Barbara," she assured me. "I'll prepare all the documents. Meanwhile, document any damage or alteration you find in your house and check if any important document is missing." After hanging up, I began a meticulous inspection of my apartment. To my relief, my safe was intact. I doubted Tyler remembered the combination, which included his birth date, a detail that now seemed ironically painful, but several drawers in my desk had been emptied, and some important documents seemed to be missing. Among them, my will. The discovery chilled my blood. How far were they willing to go? Were they planning something even more sinister? The answer came that same afternoon in the form of a notification from my bank. Someone had tried to access my main accounts using my personal data. Fortunately, the operation had been blocked as suspicious, but the attempt was there, registered in the system. I immediately called the bank to change all my passwords and strengthen my account's security. While talking with the manager, I realized something. This level of behavior wasn't normal, not even for someone desperate for money. There was something else, something I was missing. The answer came that night through an unexpected message. Jake, one of Tyler's friends from college, wrote to me discreetly. "Mrs. Collins, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I think you need to know. Tyler has had serious gambling problems for months. He's been getting into debt with dangerous people. The wedding and your generosity were his plan to settle those debts." The pieces started to fit. The luxury apartment, the excessive spending, the desperation to maintain the wedding charade. It all made sense now. It wasn't just greed, it was a forward escape, a desperate attempt to plug increasingly deep holes. I thanked Jake for his honesty and promised that this information would stay between us. Then I called Patricia to update her. "This changes things," she said thoughtfully. "If dangerous creditors are involved, we need to be more cautious. We'll strengthen legal security, but you should also consider physical protection measures." "Do you think they could harm me?" The idea seemed initially absurd, but after all that had been discovered in the last few hours, nothing seemed impossible. Probably not, but it's better to prevent. An alarm system, security cameras, maybe even consider temporarily moving to another, less known location. I followed her advice. That same night, I hired a security service to install alarms and cameras in my apartment and booked a suite at a discreet hotel under a false name. I also hired a private investigator recommended by Patricia to find out more about Tyler's alleged gambling debts. While packing essentials for my temporary stay, I found an old photograph on my nightstand. Tyler, at 5 years old, smiling with 2 missing teeth, hugging me on the beach. That image unleashed a torrent of memories. The sleepless nights caring for him when he had a fever, the sacrifices to give him the best education, the pride I felt when he graduated with honors. At what point had that sweet boy become the man who now betrayed me without remorse? Had I failed as a mother? Or had I simply been too indulgent, too willing to believe that my unconditional love would be reciprocated with the same currency? I put the photograph in my bag, not because I wanted to cling to the past, but as a reminder of what I had lost, and perhaps also of what I could regain. Not my son, but myself. The next morning, after settling into the hotel, I received a call from Patricia. "We have a problem, Barbara. Tyler and Melissa have filed a complaint against you." "A complaint? On what charge?" "They allege misappropriation. According to them, the money for the wedding was a formal gift that you couldn't unilaterally withdraw, and the funds in the joint account were legitimately theirs by prior verbal agreements." "That's absurd," I exclaimed indignantly. "There's no document supporting that version." "I know, and legally they have very little chance, but this shows how far they're willing to go. What do you recommend?" "Counterattack. We'll file our own complaint for fraud, signature forgery, and credit card misuse, and we'll add a preventive restraining order. While processing this new information, I received a social media notification. Melissa had posted a new video, this time with Tyler by her side. Both looked dejected, with reddened eyes as if they had been crying for hours. "We want to thank everyone for their support in these difficult times," Tyler began. "As many know, our wedding was canceled yesterday due to circumstances beyond our control." My mother-in-law, interrupted Melissa with a trembling voice, decided to withdraw all the financial help she had promised, leaving us and our 200 guests abandoned at the last minute. "I never thought my own mother could do something like this to me," continued Tyler, his voice breaking at the precise moment to cause the greatest dramatic effect. "All we wanted was to celebrate our love surrounded by our loved ones." I closed the video, unable to continue watching that farce. The manipulation was so obvious it was painful. They had calculated every word, every gesture, every tear to project the image of innocent victims. And the worst part was that it seemed to be working. Supportive comments multiplied under the video, along with hate messages directed at me. "Don't worry about that now," Patricia advised me when I told her about the video. "We're preparing our legal strategy. Meanwhile, I've received the preliminary report from the investigator." The information she provided confirmed the suspicions. Tyler had gambling debts exceeding $100,000. He had been frequenting underground casinos for the past year and a half, losing increasingly larger amounts. According to the investigator, some of his creditors had connections with known criminal groups known for their aggressive collection methods. "I need you to understand the gravity of the situation, Barbara," Patricia insisted. "These aren't simple family problems. We're talking about potentially dangerous people who were expecting to recover their money thanks to the wedding." The revelation stunned me. My son had not only betrayed me, he had gotten involved in a dark and dangerous world from which he was trying to escape at my expense. "What can we do?" I asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "From a legal standpoint, we'll continue with the complaints. But for your safety, I would recommend you consider a temporary change of residence, perhaps even of city." The idea of fleeing initially seemed like surrender, but then I understood that it wasn't about escaping, but about protecting myself while the situation cleared up legally. That same afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Diane, Melissa's mother. We had never been close. In fact, we had barely exchanged more than formal courtesies on the few occasions we had met. "Barbara, I know I have no right to call you after everything that's happened, but I need to talk to you." Her voice sounded tense, worried. "About what, Diane?" "Not over the phone. Could we meet? It's important." We agreed to meet at a discreet cafe downtown, a neutral and public place where both of us would feel safe. When I arrived, Diane was already there, her face showing evident signs of stress and sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," she began, after we were served coffee. "I don't know where to start." "The truth would be a good beginning," I suggested without hostility but firmly. She sighed deeply. The truth is that my daughter is involved in something very, and I think you're in danger too." Over the next hour, Diane revealed a story that exceeded my worst fears. Melissa wasn't the innocent victim mimulated by my son that I had imagined. According to her mother, she had a history of relationships with wealthy men whom she systematically manipulated for economic benefits. "Tyler isn't the first," she confessed with shame. "There have been others before." When I confronted her about her behavior, she told me she was just taking what she deserved. But this time, it's different. Barbara, there are dangerous people involved. Diane explained that Tyler's gambling debts were only part of the problem. Melissa also owed large sums to loan sharks and had promised to pay them with the wedding money and presumably with whatever they could extract from me subsequently. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of the situation. "Because they've started threatening me too," she responded, discreetly showing me several messages on her phone. "They think I have money too, or that I can get it from you." I looked at the messages with growing horror. These weren't simple debt reminders, they were explicit threats that mentioned addresses, routines, even names of distant relatives. "I've come to warn you, Barbara. And also to ask for your forgiveness. I should have intervened earlier when I began to suspect what was happening, but I didn't want to believe that my own daughter could be involved in something like this." I thanked her for her honesty and assured her that I would take additional measures to protect myself. I didn't mention that I was already staying at a hotel under a false name, or that I had hired private security. The fewer people who knew my movements, the better. After saying goodbye, I immediately called Patricia to update her on this new information. "This changes things," she said after listening to me. "We're not just dealing with fraud, but potentially with an organized network. I'm going to contact a colleague specialized in criminal law." She also recommended that I seriously consider the option of temporarily leaving the country, at least until the investigations advanced enough to neutralize the threats. That night, as I packed for a trip I had never planned to make, I received a text message from an unknown number. "We know where you are. This isn't over." My heart raced as I called the hotel's security service. After checking my room and reinforcing surveillance, I was able to relax enough to finish preparing my luggage. The destination I had chosen was Canada, specifically a small coastal town where an old college friend had retired years ago, a quiet place, away from big cities where I could go unnoticed while things resolved at home. Before boarding for the early flight, I sent a final message to Patricia with all the details of my itinerary and emergency contacts. I also gave her complete access to my bank accounts and properties, fully trusting her professionalism and discretion. The journey passed in a strange calm like the eye of a hurricane. During those hours suspended between continents, I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. Not just about Tyler and Melissa's betrayal, but about my own role in this story. Had I been too indulgent, too blind, or had I simply loved unconditionally, as any mother would? The answers weren't simple, but one thing was clear. I deserved better than this. I deserved peace, respect, and the opportunity to rebuild my life on my own terms. The small Canadian town turned out to be exactly what I needed. Cobblestone streets winding between charming Victorian houses, the scent of the sea mixing with that of flowers and gardens, and a slow pace of life that invited reflection. My friend Rachel welcomed me with open arms and without asking too many questions. I had told her the essentials over the phone, and she, with the wisdom of someone who has lived long enough to understand that life is rarely simple, offered me not just a roof but also a space to heal. I spent the first weeks simply existing, breathing the salty air, walking on the beach at dawn, rediscovering the pleasure of reading for hours without interruptions. Slowly, the open wound that had been my heart began to heal. Patricia kept me informed of the legal developments through coded emails. For precaution, the complaints were following their course, mine for fraud and forgery, Tyler and Melissa's for misappropriation. But the most worrying aspect was the investigations into the gambling debts. According to Patricia, the police had begun to take serious interest in the case, as it could be linked to a broader network of illegal gambling and money laundering. A month after my arrival in Canada, I received a notification that left me breathless. Melissa's Instagram and Tom had posted a series of photos of the intimate ceremony they had celebrated despite the cancellation of the original wedding. In the images, the couple smiled radiantly in what appeared to be a small chapel, surrounded by a handful of guests. What impacted me most weren't the forced smiles or the hypocritical comments about the triumph of love over adversity. It was recognizing the necklace that Melissa proudly wore, a set of diamonds and sapphires that had belonged to my mother, kept in my safe as a family heirloom that I someday hoped to pass on to my daughter-in-law or a future granddaughter. They must have stolen it during their incursion into my apartment, taking advantage of my momentary absence. The rage I felt was so intense that I had to sit down to keep from falling. It wasn't just the material loss, although the necklace had considerable value. It was the desecration of a sacred memory, the last tangible connection to my mother. I sent screenshots to Patricia, who immediately added the theft to our complaint. But we both knew that recovering the necklace would be difficult, especially if they had already pawned it to pay debts. That night I cried as I hadn't since my mother's death, decades ago. I cried for the loss, for the betrayal, for the destroyed innocence. But above all, I cried for the mother I had been, trusting, generous to the point of imprudence, always putting her son's needs above her own. That mother no longer existed. In her place, a new woman was emerging, more cautious but also stronger. A woman who had learned the value of boundaries and emotional self-sufficiency. The next morning, as I drank coffee on Rachel's terrace overlooking the sunrise over the Atlantic, I made a decision. I wouldn't return home until the entire legal process had concluded, but neither would I remain paralyzed in limbo. It was time to start anew, to build something for myself. With Rachel's blessing, I rented a small cottage in the town. Nothing ostentatious, just a cozy space with ocean views where I could establish my new normal. I also began to explore professional possibilities. Before retiring, I had been a financial director of a multinational. My skills were still valuable, even from a distance. I started remotely advising small businesses, offering my financial management experience to entrepreneurs who couldn't afford consultants from large firms. The work not only provided additional income, but also a sense of purpose that I had lost in recent years. Meanwhile, news from home continued to arrive. The police investigation had begun to bear fruit. Several members of the illegal gambling network had been arrested, and among the seized documentation were records of Tyler's debts. They had also found evidence of fraudulent transactions on my credit card, corroborating my complaint. 3 months after my departure, Patricia informed me that the police had issued arrest warrants for Tyler and Melissa. Not for the fraud against me, those civil cases were still following their slow course, but for money laundering and participation in a criminal organization. The news should have provided some type of satisfaction, but I only felt a profound weariness. There was no victory in seeing my only son face criminal charges, however deserved they might be. That night, as I dined with Rachel on the small terrace of my rented cottage, she asked something that left me thoughtful. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive him?" The question took me by surprise. Until that moment, I had been so focused on protecting myself, on surviving, that I hadn't really considered forgiveness as a possibility. I don't know, I responded honestly. I think forgiveness requires genuine repentance from the person who caused the harm. And so far, I haven't seen any sign of that. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person, Rachel reflected as she poured more wine. Sometimes it's a gift we give ourselves. Her words resonated with me for days. Could I forgive Tyler not to absolve him, but to free myself? Was it possible to separate forgiveness from reconciliation? I didn't have much time to reflect on it. A week later, Patricia called with urgent news. Tyler and Melissa had disappeared. The police had gone to arrest them, but their apartment was empty, with evident signs of a hasty departure. They believe they may have left the country, Patricia explained. They've issued an international search warrant, but honestly, if they've planned their escape well and have support, it could be difficult to find them. The news left me with contradictory feelings. On one hand, it meant that I probably wouldn't have to face a painful public trial. On the other, the uncertainty of not knowing where they were or if they would ever face the consequences of their actions left the story without a clear ending. What does this mean for our cases? The civil processes will be suspended until they're located. As for the criminal aspect, the investigation continues. And in fact, it's expanding. It seems that Tyler and Melissa were just a small piece in a much larger scheme. That night, as I contemplated the sea from my window, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the ending I would have chosen, but perhaps it was the one I needed. Tyler and Melissa's disappearance meant that I no longer had to wait for justice from an imperfect legal system. I could simply move forward, build my new life without the constant shadow of the legal process. And so I did. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My financial advisory business flourished, attracting clients not only from Canada but from all over North America. I began to integrate into the life of the town, learning local customs, participating in community events, making new friendships. A year after my arrival, I received a letter that came through Patricia. It had no return address, but I immediately recognized Tyler's handwriting on the envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it and read, "Mom, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you or if you'll want to read it if it does. We're far away, in a place where I hope we can start over. I can't tell you where, for obvious reasons. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness, because I know what we did is unforgivable. I just want you to know that not a day goes by without me thinking about you and all the harm we caused you. The gambling addiction consumed me, turned me into someone I don't recognize. It's not an excuse, it's simply the truth. Melissa and I have separated. I guess without money involved, there wasn't much else keeping us together. I'm trying to rebuild my life day by day, away from the temptations that destroyed me. Grandma's necklace is in a safety deposit box at National Bank in your name. The combination is my birth date. I know recovering it doesn't compensate for anything, but at least it's something I can make right. I don't expect your forgiveness or understanding. I just wanted you to know that, despite everything, I've never stopped loving you. Tyler." Tears ran down my cheeks as I read the letter over and over. It wasn't the complete apology I might have hoped for in my most optimistic moments, but it was something, an acknowledgement of the harm caused. A small gesture of reparation. Was it enough to forgive? I didn't know then, and I'm not sure I know now. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a single event, but a process, sometimes long and painful. What I do know is that the letter marked another kind of closure. I no longer needed to cling to resentment as a protective shield. I could allow myself to feel sadness for what was lost, but also gratitude for what was found, a new life, a new strength, a new understanding of myself. 2 years after that disastrous wedding rehearsal, while enjoying a quiet breakfast on the terrace of what was now my permanent home in that coastal town, I received a call from Patricia. "They've located Tyler," she informed me without preamble. My heart skipped a beat. "Where?" "In Mexico. He was alone. Melissa wasn't with him. International police detained him yesterday." "What happens now?" "He'll be extradited to face the charges. The process could take months." I remained silent, processing the news. "Barbara, do you want to proceed with our civil lawsuits? Now that they've located him, we could reactivate them." The question took me by surprise. For so long, legal justice had been my goal, but now, sitting under the Canadian sun, surrounded by the life I had built from scratch, I realized that I no longer needed it in the same way. "No," I finally decided. "Let him face the criminal charges. That's enough." "Are you sure?" The surprise in Patricia's voice was evident. "I'm sure. I no longer need more legal battles in my life. I found my peace without them." After hanging up, I remained contemplating the horizon, where the blue of the sea merged with that of the sky. I thought about the young woman I had been, the mother I had become, the woman I now was, different versions of myself, connected by an invisible thread of experiences, some painful, others beautiful. The wedding that never was had been the end of a stage in my life, but also the beginning of another, a stage where I had finally learned that true love, starting with self-love, should never require self-destruction. That evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, I wrote a brief response to Tyler's letter, which Patricia would deliver through the appropriate legal channels. "Tyler, I received your letter. I also know of your detention. Forgiveness is a long road, and I'm just beginning to travel it. I can't promise that it will ever be complete, but I'm trying for my own peace. I won't finance lawyers or pay bail. Those are consequences you must face for your own actions. But neither will I proceed with my civil lawsuits. The cycle of legal battles ends here, at least on my part. I recovered grandmother's necklace. Thank you for that. I hope you find your path to healing, as I have found mine. It won't be easy, and it will take time, but it's possible. Take care, Barbara." I sealed the letter and left it on the table, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense, but it was real. And sometimes, reality, with all its complications and nuances, is more healing than any fairy tale. Life continues with its ups and downs, its surprises, its moments of unexpected beauty, and I continue with it, wiser, stronger, finally free of expectations that don't belong to me. The wedding that never was taught me the most valuable lesson, that true love, starting with love for oneself, should never cost your dignity, your safety, or your inner peace. And that's a lesson worth more than any ceremony.